Vanessa Halbrook looked at my muddy boots, then pointed toward the spigot on the side of the clubhouse like she was giving an order to hired help. She called me the black groundskeeper, told me to stay clear of the front entrance before the meeting started, and warned me that people like me didn't wander into rooms where homeowners gathered. I didn't argue. I looked at the building standing behind her and asked one question. "Are you sure you want to hold your meeting here tonight?" Vanessa laughed. 2 hours later, nobody on her board was laughing. If you like stories where an association looks down on the wrong man and then swallows a reversal it can't chew, hit subscribe and stay to the end. The morning I drove back into Briar Glen Estates, the sprinklers were still running on the east lawn and the air smelled like wet cedar mulch. My truck is a Ford pickup with 250,000 miles on it, a cracked tailgate handle, and a toolbox in the bed that rattles over speed bumps. I have owned better vehicles. I have never owned one I trusted more. That morning it carried me past the stone entry sign, past 2 rows of houses with lawns cut to the same obedient height, and down the long curve toward the water where the clubhouse sits on a rise above the lake. I wasn't dressed like a man who invests in commercial property. I had on a gray work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, a pair of jeans I'd owned for 9 years, and boots caked with dirt from the drainage line behind the building. I'd walked that line for 40 minutes before anybody else showed up, following the slope of the ground, checking where the runoff pooled after the storms in the spring. If water sits against a foundation long enough, it will take a building apart quietly, one season at a time. That's the kind of thing I check myself. I hadn't set foot in Briar Glen in almost 3 years. The association used the clubhouse under an agreement signed back when the old board still ran things, and the day-to-day upkeep went through Leon Briggs, who had been maintaining that property since before some of these houses had roofs. Leon sent me photographs when something needed attention. He called when something needed money. In 3 years, he had never once called me about a problem he couldn't solve, which is more than I can say for most people I've paid. The reason I came out that Monday was simple. The use agreement for the clubhouse had less than 60 days left on it, and several maintenance reimbursements the association was contractually responsible for had gone unpaid for months. Not a catastrophic amount of money, enough to notice, enough to raise a question about how the place was being run. Before I decided whether to renew, I wanted to put my own hands on the property and my own eyes on the people using it. So I was crouched by an irrigation valve near the front walk, sleeve pushed up, forearm streaked with mud, when a white luxury SUV came the drive and stopped at an angle across 2 parking spaces. Vanessa Halbrook stepped out. She didn't ask my name. She didn't ask what I was doing. I watched her first glance travel from my face down to my boots and then over to the truck parked at the curb, and I watched her arrive at a conclusion somewhere in that half second. It wasn't a guess. A guess has some humility in it. This was a filing decision. She had a drawer in her mind labeled for men who looked like me holding tools on a Monday morning, and she put me in it without breaking stride. "The east lawn is uneven," she said. "It's been uneven for 2 weeks, and people who work here don't park in the board spaces." I straightened up and wiped my palms on my jeans. "I don't work for the association." She heard that the way a certain kind of person hears everything, which is to say she heard a challenge. She adjusted her sunglasses up onto her head and gave me a look that was almost patient, the way you'd look at a child explaining why bedtime shouldn't apply to him. "I don't care which landscaping outfit is signing your checks," she said. "In Briar Glen, you follow my rules." That was the moment I understood this wasn't going to be a story about a woman mistaking my profession. People mistake my profession all the time. I've been handed a coat check ticket at a hotel where I was the closing party on a purchase agreement. I've been asked to bring the car around by men who then sat across a table from me and signed their names under mine. Mistakes happen. What matters is what happens in the 10 seconds after the mistake, and Vanessa had already told me. She looked at a black man in work clothes standing on that grass and could not construct a single other reason for him to be there except service. I didn't correct her. I picked up my folder from the walkway, tucked it under my arm, and started toward the clubhouse doors. She moved to cut me off before I got there. "Groundskeepers use the side door," she said. I stopped. I looked down at the key ring in my hand, the brass one with 4 keys, and a small tag worn smooth. Then I looked back up at her face. "Why can't I use this one?" Her jaw tightened, and something in her posture shifted from managing to correcting. She explained, in the tone of a woman who had explained many things to many people, that the board had a meeting scheduled in that building, and she was not going to have maintenance staff wandering through the lobby in front of homeowners. She said the word homeowners the way some people say the word citizens. I asked her, what if I were a homeowner? Vanessa glanced past me at my pickup with the rusted tailgate, then she gave me a smile with only one corner of her mouth in it. "Are you?" The question wasn't a question. It was an answer wearing a question's clothes. In 4 syllables, she told me exactly what she believed to be impossible, and she was so comfortable believing it that she didn't bother to hide the belief from the man standing in front of her. I didn't answer. I stepped around her, put my key in the front lock, and turned it. The bolt drew back with that heavy, clean sound a good lock makes, and I heard her breath catch behind me. "Where did you get that key?" "It's mine." "That key belongs to the maintenance contractor," she said, and her voice climbed. "If Leon handed you a master key, that is a security violation, and I will have security here in 5 minutes. Give it to me." "No." I said it the same way you'd decline a second cup of coffee. That's what undid her, I think. Not the refusal, the flatness of it. Vanessa Halbrook had built a life in that neighborhood on the understanding that raising her voice produced compliance, and I hadn't raised mine at all. She pulled her phone out and called Leon right there on the walkway, standing 4 feet from me, with the speaker turned up loud enough that I could hear the ring. Leon picked up on the third one. "Leon," she said, "your new black groundskeeper has an attitude problem." There was a pause on the line. I have known Leon Briggs for 11 years. He is a careful man, slow to speak, and he was doing arithmetic in that silence. "Vanessa," he said, "Malcolm isn't. He let himself into the clubhouse with a master key," she cut in. "He refuses to move his vehicle. He refuses to hand over the key. I want him off this property before 6 o'clock. "Ma'am, if you'd let me finish." "I don't have time for this. Handle it." She ended the call because a silver sedan had pulled in behind her SUV and she had a fresh audience. I want to be clear about what happened in that phone call, because it mattered later. Leon Briggs, a man who had worked on that building for years, was interrupted 3 times by a woman who had never once gotten his last name right in a written notice. She had signed work orders addressed to Leon Brigham, Leon Bridges, and Leon B. He had corrected her twice and then stopped bothering. She used his first name the way you'd use a tool. Calvin Pierce got out of the silver sedan with a folder under his arm and a travel mug in his other hand. 61 years old, gray at the temples, the kind of man who dresses 1 notch nicer than the occasion requires because he was raised to. He looked at me for a good 4 seconds longer than a stranger warrants. Something moved behind his eyes, recognition trying to find a door. Vanessa got to him before the door opened. "Calvin, we have a situation," she said, and then she told him in her version, a new landscaping employee had let himself into the clubhouse without authorization, spoken to her disrespectfully, refused direct instruction, and was currently occupying board parking. She delivered it in about 20 seconds. It was efficient. It was also, in every particular that mattered, a work of fiction assembled from a single assumption. Calvin looked at me. "Is that accurate?" I said, "She's told it the way she saw it." That's all I gave him. Not agreement, not denial. I had decided something out there on the walkway, standing in the wet grass with her voice still in the air, and the decision was this. I was not going to spend one breath of that morning arguing for my own standing. Every minute I stayed quiet, Vanessa would keep building. She was already 3 stories up on a foundation that didn't exist. The kindest thing I could do for that board was let them watch her keep pouring concrete. Board members arrived over the next hour, and Vanessa did something I've seen before in people who confuse authority with worth. She started using me as a demonstration. She didn't do it crudely. She did it the way a person shows off a well-trained dog. Every time somebody new came through the parking lot, she found a reason to give me an instruction in front of them, and she gave it in a voice pitched slightly louder than conversation. "Move those planters closer to the wall, the ones by the patio, they're blocking the sight line. Check the sprinkler heads on the west side. While you're standing there, 2 of them are spraying the sidewalk. There's mud tracked by the front door. Somebody with dirty boots walked through. Get a mop. And move that truck. Board members will need those spaces." I declined each one, calmly individually, no speeches. "I'm not going to move the planters. I've already checked the sprinklers this morning. I'll leave the mud. The truck stays where it is." 4 refusals in a row, and something started to go wrong in her face, because in her experience this simply did not happen. Briar Glen had trained her. In 2 years as president, she had gotten a family to repaint their front door because the shade of blue was 3 tones off the approved palette. She had gotten a widower to remove a wheelchair ramp and rebuild it on the other side of his porch. She had gotten a landscaping crew fired over a mailbox. When Vanessa Halbrook said a thing, the thing generally happened, and she had come to believe that was a fact about her rather than a fact about power. Dana Holloway was the first one to notice the shape of what she was seeing. Dana is 44, treasurer, and the only person on that board who read documents before signing them. She'd arrived with a banker's box of financial records because the evening agenda included a facilities budget review, and she'd been carrying that box past me for 10 minutes while Vanessa performed. She set it down on the patio table and said, "Vanessa, are you certain he's new staff? Because nobody notified me of a new vendor and I signed the vendor payments." Vanessa didn't even look at me. She said 2 words. "Look at him." That's the whole sentence. Look at him. I want you to sit inside it for a second because there is no version of that sentence that means anything except what it means. It wasn't about a uniform. It wasn't about a work order. She had offered his skin and his clothes and his truck as sufficient evidence, and she offered it out loud in front of witnesses to a woman holding financial records. I said, "What do you see?" She turned to me then, and for a moment I watched her calculate whether to answer. She decided not to. Instead, she pivoted to procedure, which is what people do when the honest answer would be expensive. "The people we hire to keep this place beautiful," she said, "do not question the president of this association." "That's interesting," I said. "You keep talking about who has the right to be inside a building, and you've never once asked who owns it." She laughed, short and dismissive, but there was a hairline crack in it. "The clubhouse is Briar Glen Estates property. It's association property. It's in the community's name." "Have you read the deed?" "I don't need to read a deed for a building we've been using for over a decade." And there it was, the whole legal spine of that day, spoken out loud by the woman it was about to fall on. The association used that clubhouse. The association did not own that clubhouse. Those are different verbs, and the difference is worth several $1,000,000. 14 years ago, Briar Glen Estates was a half-built residential project with a nervous lender and a developer whose numbers had stopped working. The original site plan called for a lakefront amenity complex, and the shell of the clubhouse was up, framed and roofed when the money got tight. To keep the rich eventual events and satisfy his lender, the developer carved the lakefront amenity parcel out of the common area and sold it off as a separate transaction. Building, lot, patio, the parking apron to the south, a stretch of shoreline, and the service access road. 1 parcel, 1 deed, 1 buyer. I'm not going to tell you yet what happened next. Not because I'm being clever. Because that morning nobody at Briar Glen had bothered to look it up either, and I want you standing where they were standing. What everyone knew was this: a few years after that sale, the association signed a long-term use agreement for the amenity complex at a rate that was, by any honest measure, generous. $2,200 a month, flat, with the property owner covering structural maintenance and the association covering interior upkeep, utilities, and a list of scheduled reimbursements. In that market, for that square footage, on water, that number was not a market rent. It was a courtesy dressed up as a contract. The old board understood exactly what they had. Every president from that era, all 3 of them, made a point of walking the property with the owner once a year. They knew whose signature was on the other side of that agreement, and they treated it like something worth protecting. Vanessa had been president for 2 years and had never read the original agreement. She'd read the summary in a binder. She had seen the association's logo on the sign by the front door, and from that sign she had constructed an entire theory of ownership, and from that theory she had constructed an entire theory of who could stand where on that grass. Dana was still looking at me, so I asked her a question. "Does tonight's agenda include the facilities budget review? Item 4, I think." Dana went very still. "How do you know the agenda?" Vanessa spun on me. "Yes, how does he know the agenda? Who gave you internal board material?" "I received a copy," I said. "From who?" "From the association." That was true in every particular, and it explained absolutely nothing, which was the point. Because you should be asking the same thing that board should have been asking, and only Dana was. Why does a man they're calling a groundskeeper have the board's agenda? Dana went to her box. I watched her do it. She crouched down, thumbed through a hanging file at the back, and came up with a manila envelope with a green certified mail sticker across the corner. Somebody had opened it and put it back. It had arrived 3 weeks earlier. The return address read Reddick Property Holdings, LLC. "Vanessa," Dana said, "did you see this?" "I saw it. It's a facilities management company. I gave it to the assistant to handle." "It's certified. You signed for it." "I sign for 11 things a week." Dana took out the letter and read it aloud, and I stood there on the patio in my muddy boots and listened to my own attorney's language come out of a stranger's mouth. The letter had 4 points: overdue maintenance reimbursements totaling $14,600 across 9 months, a liability insurance certificate that had lapsed into the agreement's requirements, which meant the association had been holding public events in a building without the coverage it had promised to carry. Notice that the use agreement would expire in 60 days with no automatic renewal provision, and a request, courteous but unmistakably formal, that the property owner meet with the full board before any renewal was considered. Calvin set his coffee down. Vanessa read the letter over Dana's shoulder, and then she looked up at me and did the last thing I expected, which was double down. "See," she said, and she almost sounded relieved, "the owner is a company, not you." I never said it wasn't my company. The patio went quiet. Somewhere out on the lake a baseboat motor started and faded. Calvin Pierce turned all the way toward me for the first time and studied my face with real attention, and I could see the door in his memory swinging wider. A conference room, a stack of documents, a younger man in a suit signing on the owner's line. Vanessa laughed at me. I mean, she actually laughed out loud with her head tipped back an inch. "Oh, that's good. That's very good. You've been caught letting yourself into a building you don't belong in, and now you're the mystery owner." She turned to Calvin. "This is what happens when vendors aren't vetted. I'm going to call this Reddick company myself and let them know one of their people is out here impersonating ownership." "You should call," I said. "I will." The numbers at the bottom of the letter. She took the letter out of Dana's hand and dialed the number on the letterhead, and she held the phone up slightly so everyone could see her doing it, because she was still performing. My phone rang in my shirt pocket. Nobody moved. I took it out. On the screen was Wesley Grant's office line forwarded through, because the number on that letterhead rolls to my attorney's office and then to me. I looked at it for maybe 3 seconds. Then I silenced the ringer and put the phone back in my pocket. The call went to voicemail, and Vanessa heard a recording, and she hung up and said, "Nobody's answering," and honestly, she believed the timing was a coincidence. That's the part I still think about. She had constructed her explanation of me so thoroughly that reality had to knock twice. Dana Holloway did not think it was a coincidence. Dana looked at my shirt pocket, then at the letter in her hand, then at Vanessa, and I watched a treasurer's mind start reconciling accounts. That's when Vanessa decided to remove me. The board was assembling inside now, 7 people around the long table in the main room, agenda packets out, the ceiling fans turning. Vanessa came back through the front doors, found me standing near the windows on the lake side, and announced to the room that I would not be present for the meeting. "Calvin, call security, have them stand by." Calvin didn't reach for his phone. He rubbed the back of his neck and asked me, in the tone of a man hoping to be handed an easy exit, "Sir, do you have any documentation showing you're authorized to be in this building?" "I do." "Could I see it?" "Not yet." Vanessa threw her hands up. "He's stalling. He's been stalling for an hour." And then she said the thing that I carried out of that building with me. Not the groundskeeper line. That one was ugly, but it was reflex. This one she had to reach for. "I've dealt with your type before," she said. "A man puts on a clean shirt and a set of keys and decides he's a businessman. You see a community like this one, with money in it, and you start telling people you know the developer, you've got a company, you've got an attorney. It's always the same story, and it never survives one phone call. Your type. I want to tell you I felt nothing. I have a reputation for being unreadable in rooms, and I've earned it, and I kept my face perfectly still. But something old moved in me at that sentence, because I had heard versions of it for 30 years. I heard it at 26, walking a warehouse property in a jacket that cost more than my rent, when the listing agent asked me twice whether the actual buyer would be joining us. I heard it at 34, at a closing table, when a title officer slid the paperwork past me to the white contractor sitting to my right and asked if he wanted to review it first. I heard it at 38, on this very parcel, standing in the framed shell of this exact building with the developer's own lender, when the lender's associate looked around the empty concrete and asked me pleasantly where the owner's group was flying in from. I bought this parcel with money I made over 19 years, most of it slowly, some of it in ways that cost me a marriage and both of my knees, and I have spent my whole working life being asked to produce the real man behind the man they were looking at. So no, I did not want to prove my worth to Vanessa Halbrook. There is no satisfaction in that. If I have to open a folder to become a person to you, then you and I are not going to be friends after the folder closes. What I wanted, standing at those windows with my folder under my arm, was to see how far she would go while she believed I was powerless. Because that's the only honest test of a person's character. Not how they treat someone they think outranks them, how they treat someone they've decided can't fight back. Vanessa went all the way. She sat down at the head of the table, opened a laptop, typed for maybe 90 seconds, and printed a document on the little printer in the office alcove. Then she signed it, and she brought it to me, and she held it out with 2 fingers. An internal trespass notice, association letterhead, my description where a name should be, instruction to vacate association property immediately and refrain from returning pending board review. You can leave on your own, she said, or you can leave with an escort. Dana stood up. Vanessa, stop. What if he actually represents the property owner? What then? Vanessa didn't hesitate. Then I'll apologize. I took the notice from her hand and read it, and then I folded it once and put it in my shirt pocket next to the phone. You're sure about that? Absolutely. I looked at my watch, 9 minutes before 7. Then let's wait for my attorney. She turned to the board with her arms out, delighted, and said, now the groundskeeper has an attorney. 2 people laughed. I noted which 2, not out of spite, out of habit. In my business, you keep track of who laughs when the room thinks the powerful person is winning, because that tells you who to never put in a room alone with your money. At 2 minutes before 7, a black sedan came down the drive and parked deliberately directly across the 2 board spaces Vanessa had told me to vacate. Wesley Grant is 58 years old, 6'1", and has never in 11 years walked into a room faster than he needed to. He came through the front doors carrying a document case and a legal pad, said good evening to the table generally, and stood at the far end. Vanessa was still talking when he set the case down. She called the meeting to order. That's the part I'd like you to picture, because it tells you everything about how hard some people will hold a wheel that's already come off the column. Wesley Grant standing at the end of her table with a document case, Dana Holloway with a certified letter in front of her, Calvin Pierce staring at me with his coffee going cold, and Vanessa Halbrook reading the roll call. Then she looked up and addressed me one last time. This is a closed session for board members. I'm going to ask you to step outside. Final request. Wesley said. Wesley Grant, counsel for Reddick Property Holdings. Nobody said anything for about 4 seconds. Dana's head came up. She got there instantly. Calvin's face went the color of the tablecloth, and he sat back in his chair like something had let go in his chest. Vanessa recovered faster than I expected. With respect, counsel, an attorney for a facilities vendor has no standing in an association board meeting. This is a private governance session. I'm not counsel for a vendor, Wesley said. I'm counsel for your landlord. He opened the case. He laid out 3 documents on the table in front of Dana because he'd read the room in 9 seconds and figured out who actually read things. A recorded deed stamped by the county, a parcel survey with the boundary lines highlighted in yellow, and the original use agreement, 14 pages, signed and notarized with the signature page flagged. Briar Glen Estates Homeowners Association does not own this building, Wesley said. The association holds a use agreement. What the association currently uses under that agreement is the clubhouse structure, the south parking apron, the patio and pergola, approximately 300 feet of shoreline including the swim dock, and the service access easement off Willow Bend. All of it sits on a single legally separate parcel, carved out of the original common area in the developer's 4th amended plat and recorded that same year. Dana turned the deed around and read it. The parcel owner of record, Wesley said, is Reddick Property Holdings, a limited liability company. Vanessa put both hands flat on the table. Fine, then where is Mr. Reddick? Wesley didn't answer her. He looked down the table at me. Malcolm? I walked up along the side of the table. I took out my wallet, slid out my driver's license, and set it on the wood. Then I opened the folder I'd been carrying since 7 that morning, the folder Vanessa had watched me pick up off the walkway, the folder she'd assumed held work orders, and I laid 3 pages next to the license, the LLC certificate of formation, the current annual report listing officers, and a single page of the operating agreement. Malcolm Elijah Reddick, managing member, Reddick Property Holdings, LLC. There was no shouting, nobody stood up and pointed. I didn't raise my voice or make a speech, and I'll tell you honestly, I've had 30 years to learn that the quiet version lands harder. All that happened in that room was a man in muddy boots setting some paper down on a table. Dana read my name out loud, just the name, Malcolm Reddick. Calvin Pierce said, "Oh my God." Then he said the signing, 2012, the conference room over on Hartwell. You sat across from Dale Ferris. I was there as an observer for the buyer's committee. You had a gray suit and you didn't say 12 words the whole meeting. 11, I said. Dale counted. Vanessa's eyes went from the license to the deed to the certificate of formation and then up to my work shirt and my jeans and my boots and back down to the paper. She did that circuit twice. I have never watched a belief system fail in real time quite like that. You own this building, she said. No, Vanessa. I let that sit for a second because she deserved the full sentence. I own the building, the parking lot, the patio, the dock, and most of the ground you've been ordering me off of all morning. And here's the thing, that was not the moment she got frightened. She was embarrassed, certainly. Her face went blotchy and her hands went to her collar. But embarrassment is survivable. Embarrassment can be managed with a well-worded email. What made Vanessa Halbrook genuinely afraid arrived about 90 seconds later, when Dana Holloway looked up from the use agreement with her finger on a line and asked the only question that mattered. "Mr. Grant, what is the current status of this agreement?" "It expires in 52 days, Wesley said. "There is no automatic renewal clause. There is no option to extend. Renewal requires a new written agreement executed by both parties." "And has anyone from our side contacted you about renewal?" "We contacted you 3 times. Wesley flipped his legal pad. An email to the association's general inbox 6 days ago, no response. A first-class letter to the president of RID 78 days ago, no response. A certified letter, return receipt requested 22 days ago, signed for by V. Halbrook, no response." Dana turned to Vanessa. She didn't look angry. She looked like a woman reading a bank statement she already understood. 3 times. "I get a great deal of mail," Vanessa said. "You signed for it." "I signed for." She stopped. She had used that line already and she heard it. Wesley kept going evenly because he wasn't there to humiliate anyone. He was there to establish a record. The reimbursements, $14,600 over 9 months for items the association had explicitly agreed to cover. Not enough money to threaten an association with 211 homes in it. Exactly enough money to prove that someone had stopped reading the paperwork. Dana confirmed out loud that those invoices had never reached her desk for payment approval, which meant they had been intercepted somewhere between the mailbox and the treasurer. Then the insurance. The agreement required the association to carry a specific liability limit naming the property owner as an additional insured, and the association certificates had lapsed out of compliance 11 months earlier when Vanessa changed carriers to save $900 a year and never sent the new certificate for review. For 11 months, Briar Glen had been running yoga classes, holiday parties, a summer swim program, and 4 weddings in a building where their own coverage didn't match their own contract. Calvin Pierce put his face in his hands. And then Dana asked the question that emptied the room of air. "If this isn't renewed," she said slowly, "what exactly do we lose?" "Wesley, let me answer that one." "The meeting room you're sitting in," I said, "the gym on the north end, the pool and the deck, because the pool is on my parcel and always has been, the dock, the patio where every resident event in this community has been held for 10 years, and about a third of the parking for the whole amenity area, which is the third everybody actually uses." Nobody said anything. "Your community sells itself on lakefront amenities," I said. "Every listing in this neighborhood for the last decade has used the word Clubhouse. There's a photograph of that patio on your entrance sign. If this agreement lapses on day 53, you have a governance body with no meeting space, a swim program with no pool, and 211 homeowners who are going to want to know how that happened." Vanessa Halbrook understood at that moment that the man she had ordered to use the side door was the only person on earth who could decide whether her community kept the thing it was named for. Her voice changed not a little completely. "Mr. Reddick," she said, "I think we can resolve all of this tonight. Clearly there's been a significant misunderstanding, and I want to say that our board values this relationship enormously." "What changed in the last 10 minutes?" She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You've called me 3 things this morning, Groundskeeper, your type, and now Mr. Reddick. Nothing about me changed in that time. I'm wearing the same shirt. I drove the same truck. My boots are just as dirty. So I'd like to know in front of your board what changed." "It was a misunderstanding," she said. "I made an assumption about your role, and I apologize for the confusion." "You didn't make an assumption about my role. You made an assumption about my place." I looked around that table then at all 7 of them. She never asked my name, not once in 3 hours. She never asked who I worked for. She never asked why I had a key. She looked at my skin, my clothes, and my vehicle, and from those 3 things she decided where I stood in this community and what door I was allowed to use. And when I declined the position she'd assigned me, she wrote me a trespass notice. I took the folded paper out of my shirt pocket and set it on the table next to my driver's license. That's her signature from 20 minutes ago. Dana didn't look at Vanessa. She looked at the table. Calvin Pierce looked at his hands. And that was the part of the evening that I think actually mattered, more than the deed, more than the 52 days, because the discomfort in that room had stopped belonging exclusively to Vanessa Halbrook. 7 people had watched their president do that, some of them for the better part of an hour, and exactly one of them, Dana, had said stop. 2 had laughed. 4 had looked at their agendas and waited for it to be over, the way people do, telling themselves it wasn't their business, telling themselves somebody else would handle it, telling themselves it probably wasn't as bad as it sounded. I said, I want to be clear about something, because I don't want anybody leaving here tonight with the wrong lesson. The problem is not that Vanessa got my job wrong. Anybody can get anybody's job wrong. I've done it. I once handed my coat to a woman who turned out to be the architect of record on a 9-story building. That's a mistake, and you apologize and you move on with your life. The problem is how she treated a man she believed had no power to answer back. That's it. That's the whole thing. She wasn't rude to me because she thought I was a landscaper. She was rude to me because she thought a landscaper couldn't cost her anything. Vanessa tried once more. She was tough, I'll give her that. Mr. Reddick, whatever you think of me personally, we should discuss terms. You've had a tenant in this building for over a decade with no vacancy, no turnover, no collection issues. There are collection issues, 14,600 of them. And I'm sure neither of us wants to disrupt that. You need the rental income and we need the space. We're in this together. And there, finally, she handed me the last thing I needed. Vanessa, do you know what the association pays for this parcel? It's in the budget, $26,400 a year. $2,200 a month, correct. Do you know what 9,000 square feet of finished lakefront event space with a pool, a dock, and dedicated parking rents for in this county? She didn't answer. $9,000 to $11,000 a month, depending on the term. I've had 2 unsolicited offers in the last 4 years. One from a private event company that wanted the building for weddings and corporate retreats. One from a medical group that wanted to tear it down and put up an outpatient facility on the water, which the county would fight, but not forever. Then why? Calvin started. Because of Ruth Danvers, I said. Calvin closed his eyes and made a small sound. Ruth was president when I bought this parcel. She came out here in February in a raincoat and walked the whole property line with me, and she told me the truth, which was that if this building went commercial, this neighborhood would lose the only place it had to be a neighborhood. She asked me for a number she could actually put in a budget. So I gave her one, and I kept giving it to Marcus Webb after her and to Elaine Foster after him. 3 presidents in 12 years, and every one of them walked this property with me once a year and asked me how the roof was doing. I looked at Vanessa. You've been president for 2 years. You've never asked to meet the owner of the building you hold your meetings in, not once. And when he was standing on the front walk this morning, you told him to go around the side. The math in that room reversed itself so completely you could feel the floor tilt. Vanessa had walked in believing I needed her, that a landlord always needs a tenant, that money is leverage, that she held something I wanted. And what she learned in front of her entire board was that she had been living inside a favor for 2 years without knowing there was a favor, and she had spent the morning insulting the man who granted it. I wasn't threatening anybody. I want to be honest about that too. I never once said I would refuse to renew. I told them what the property was worth, what I'd been offered, and why I hadn't taken it, and every word of that was true. Sometimes the truth stated flatly by a person who has options does more work than a threat ever could. Dana Holloway asked for a recess. Mr. Reddick, Mr. Grant, would you give us 20 minutes? The board needs to go into executive session. Wesley and I waited out on the patio. The lake had gone the color of a nickel and the cicadas had started. Leon Briggs came around the corner of the building at some point with a wrench in his hand and stopped when he saw me, and I could see him bracing for something. She called you, I said. She did. Leon leaned against the railing. Malcolm, I tried to tell her. She's been calling me by 3 different last names for 2 years. What was I supposed to do, mail her a photograph of you? You did fine. It was never your job to protect her from herself. Is the lease gone? I don't know yet. It was 26 minutes, not 20. Calvin Pierce came out to get us and he stopped in the doorway and said, quietly, so nobody inside could hear, I should have said something at 9 o'clock this morning. I recognized you and I couldn't place it and I let it go, and then it got loud and I let that go too. I don't have a better explanation than that. That's the most honest thing anybody said to me today. Inside, the seating had changed. Vanessa Halbrook was no longer at the head of the table. She was in the 3rd chair on the left with her laptop closed in front of her, and Dana Holloway was standing. Calvin read the motion because Dana had asked him to and because he was still vice president. By a vote of 6-1 effective immediately, the board had suspended the president's authority to represent Briar Glen Estates Homeowners Association in any communication, negotiation, or execution of documents involving Reddick property holdings or the amenity parcel. The treasurer was designated the sole authorized representative for those matters. A separate motion directed the treasurer to conduct a full review of the association's outgoing correspondence handling the lapsed insurance certificate and 9 months of unprocessed invoices. and a third motion scheduled a special meeting of the membership in 18 days. Vanessa said the board couldn't do that. She said the bylaws vested negotiating authority in the president. Dana had the bylaws open already with a sticky tab on it, and she read Article 6, Section 4 out loud, which allows the board by majority vote to reassign any officer's delegate authority in a matter where that officer has a conflict or where the board finds the association's interests are at risk. They could do it. They had done it. And I want to be clear about what I did not do because it's the part I'm proudest of, and it isn't much. I never asked them to remove her, not once. I didn't suggest it, hint at it, or make it a condition of anything. I never said the word resignation. If I had, every consequence that landed on Vanessa Halbrook that night would have belonged to me instead of to her, and she'd have spent the rest of her life telling people she got railroaded by a landlord with a grudge. She didn't get railroaded, she got measured. She spent one morning being exactly who she was, in front of 7 people who had the authority to do something about it, and they did. The parking lot had emptied out by the time I came outside, down to my pickup Wesley sedan and Vanessa's SUV still crooked across 2 spaces. She was waiting between my truck and the curb with her keys in her hand. "Mr. Reddick, could I have a minute?" "You can." She had rehearsed it. I could hear the structure in it. She'd been under enormous pressure this year. Her mother's health, a special assessment vote that had gone badly, a lawsuit threat from a homeowner over a fence. She had genuinely believed I was a contractor, and there had been an incident in the spring with an unvetted subcontractor and a stolen leaf blower, so she'd been on alert. She had never intended for any of it to come across the way it apparently had. Things had gotten blown out of proportion very quickly, and she hoped we could move past it. 4 sentences of context for every 1 sentence of apology. I've heard it before. It's the most common structure in the English language. When she finished, I asked her one question. What if I really had been the groundskeeper? She opened her mouth, and then she didn't say anything. I gave her a good while. The sprinklers had come on again on the east lawn, ticking around in the dark. That's the question, I said. Not the deed, not the lease, that one. Because if I'd been the man cutting that grass, if I'd shown up this morning with nothing in that folder but a work order and a pay stub, every single thing you said to me would still have been wrong. You'd just have gotten away with it. I know, she said, barely. You'd have gotten away with it, and Leon would have driven home tonight the way he's driven home 100 nights, and nobody at that table would have said a word, and you'd have had a perfectly good evening. I know. So don't apologize to me for being wrong about who I am. I don't need that. Apologize to yourself for what you were willing to do to a man you thought was nobody. She didn't have anything left. She nodded once and walked to her SUV, and she sat in it for a long time without starting it. I got the door of the pickup open and set my folder on the passenger seat next to a thermos and a roll of pipe tape. The hinge groans. It's groaned for 6 years. I've been meaning to hit it with something. I looked back once. Vanessa was watching me get into the truck, and her face had changed in a way I don't think she chose. That morning she'd looked at that vehicle and read it like a sentence. Now she was reading it again and finding a completely different sentence, and I could see her wondering how many other things she had read that way and never gone back to check. That's the whole story, and here's the part I'd like you to keep. At 7:20 in the morning, Vanessa Halbrook looked at a rusted Ford pickup parked outside a lakefront clubhouse and decided the man driving it must work for whoever owned the place. She got exactly one thing wrong. The man who owned the place was the one driving it.